The great assembly hall of the Galactic Consortium buzzed with nervous energy, a sound that reminded me of 1,000 dying starflies all whimpering at once. Commander Vex 9 shifted uncomfortably in his biosuit, his 4 eyes blinking in rapid succession. The human delegation hadn't arrived yet, and frankly most of us were hoping they'd gotten lost in hyperspace. "Remind me again why we're bothering with this charade," uttered High Chancellor Corinth, her serpentine neck coiling with obvious irritation. "These primitives barely discovered faster than light travel 5 rotations ago." But I couldn't help but chuckle at the irony. 5 rotations ago, we'd been calling them amusing little creatures who played with fire sticks and built monuments to their own ignorance. Now, here we were, sweating through our environmental suits because those same primitives had somehow managed to turn half our border worlds into smoldering ruins. The massive doors at the far end of the hall suddenly hissed open, and silence fell like a meteor hitting atmosphere. 3 figures walked in, and I had to admit, they certainly knew how to make an entrance. The human in the center moved with the kind of casual confidence that made my chitin crawl. She was tall by human standards, with short auburn hair and eyes that seemed to catalog every weakness in the room before she'd taken 5 steps. "That's Director Elena Vasquez," whispered Trade Minister Klex, his voice barely audible through his breathing apparatus. "Their chief diplomatic negotiator." Behind her walked 2 others. A man with graying temples and the kind of smile that suggested he found everything mildly amusing, and a woman whose cybernetic implants glowed softly blue against her dark skin. They moved like predators who'd already decided they weren't hungry, which somehow made them infinitely more terrifying. "Distinguished members of the Galactic Consortium," Director Vasquez began, her voice carrying easily through the vast chamber without any need for amplification. "Thank you for finally agreeing to meet with us." The word finally hung in the air like a challenge. High Chancellor Corinth's neck bristled with barely contained fury. "Let's dispense with the pleasantries," Corinth hissed, her translator giving her words a mechanical edge. "You're here because your species has committed acts of unprecedented aggression against sovereign consovereign worlds. We demand immediate cessation of hostilities and full reparations." I watched Director Vasquez's expression with fascination. Her face didn't change, but something shifted behind her eyes, like watching a star go supernova in slow motion. "Acts of aggression?" she repeated, tilting her head slightly. "That's an interesting choice of words, Chancellor." The man behind her, whose nameplate read General Marcus Webb, let out a sound that might have been a laugh if it hadn't been so cold. "Director, should we tell them about the surveillance footage from New Sydney?" "Oh, I think we should," Vasquez replied, her tone conversational. "But first, let me ask you something, Chancellor. When you ordered the bombardment of our agricultural colonies, did you expect us to simply roll over and die?" The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Commander Vex 9 started clicking his mandibles nervously, a sure sign he was calculating escape routes. "But we have no knowledge of any bombardment," Corinth replied stiffly. "The consortium maintains strict protocols regarding." "Protocols?" The third human, Dr. Maya Singh, according to her identification tag, stepped forward. Her cybernetic eye whirred as it focused on the Chancellor. "You want to talk about protocols? 3 months ago, your peacekeeping fleet turned 17 of our farming worlds into glass. 12 million civilians, Chancellor. 12 million people who were growing food, not building weapons." The silence that followed was so complete I could hear my own cardiac rhythm hammering against my exoskeleton. This wasn't going according to anyone's script. The consortium acted in accordance with established precedent, High Chancellor Corinth said, but her voice lacked its earlier conviction. Those worlds were in violation of settlement agreements and posed a potential threat to. "Stop." Director Vasquez's voice cut through the air like a plasma blade. "Just stop talking for a moment and listen to yourself. You're standing there, in this grand hall, surrounded by representatives from 300 worlds, trying to justify genocide because we didn't ask permission to plant corn. I had to admire the human's rhetorical skills. She'd taken what should have been a tribunal condemning human aggression and somehow turned it into an indictment of consortium policy. The representatives around me were shifting uncomfortably, mandibles clicking, tentacles writhing, whatever their species did when they realized they might be on the wrong side of history. Furthermore, General Webb continued, pulling out a small device that projected a holographic display. We have detailed records of every ship that participated in the bombardment. Every captain, every crew member, every order given. Would you like to see them? The hologram showed a massive consortium dreadnought, its hull gleaming with the distinctive markings of the Third Fleet. Energy beams lanced down toward a planet's surface, and even from this distance, I could see the bloom of nuclear fire-consuming cities. That's the CNS Dominator, Dr. Singh said, her voice clinically precise. Under the command of Admiral Zephon 12. The same Admiral Zephon 12 who, according to your own military records, received a commendation for exceptional service in maintaining galactic stability. I glanced around the chamber and saw Admiral Zephon 12 himself, sitting in the military section. His facial plates had gone pale, and his breathing apparatus was cycling rapidly. The evidence is fabricated, he declared, but his voice cracked like old chitin. Humans are known for their deceptive capabilities. Director Vasquez turned to look at him directly, and I swear the temperature dropped another few degrees. Admiral, are you calling me a liar? I'm stating facts, Zephon 12 replied, though he seemed to be shrinking into his chair. Your species has a documented history of... Let me stop you right there, Vasquez interrupted. Because you're about to say something that will end this conversation in a way nobody wants. She walked closer to the Admiral's section, her footsteps echoing in the absolute silence. You want to talk about documented history? Let's talk about the Battle of Kepler 442 billion. 26 days ago. Your fleet engaged our defensive platforms, thinking you were dealing with primitive human technology. General Webb's smile grew wider, and I realized it was the kind of smile that usually preceded something exploding. Tell them about the casualties, Elena, he said, gladly. Out of the consortium's attacking force of 47 ships, exactly 0 returned to their home bases. 0, Admiral, not a single ship, not a single escape pod. Nothing but expanding clouds of superheated plasma and regret. The implications of her words hit the assembly like a shockwave. 47 ships destroyed with no survivors meant either the humans had developed weapons technology far beyond our understanding, or they'd chosen to leave no witnesses. That's impossible, breathed Trade Minister Clax. Our ships have quantum shielding, adaptive armor, redundant life support systems. Had Dr. Singh corrected. Past tense, they had those things. Right up until our defensive platforms introduced them to the concept of weaponized gravity wells. But I felt my own breathing apparatus cycle faster. Weaponized gravity wells were theoretical constructs, mathematical impossibilities that existed only in the fevered dreams of theoretical physicists. If the humans had actually built them. You're bluffing, Admiral Zephon 12 said, but his voice was barely a whisper. Am I? Director Vasquez asked. Would you like to send another fleet to test the theory? I'm sure Admiral Trachis 7 would be happy to volunteer, wouldn't you, Admiral? Every eye in the chamber turned to Admiral Trachis 7, who was now making a sound like a deflating atmospheric processor. The fact that the humans knew specific fleet compositions and command structures meant their intelligence gathering was far more sophisticated than anyone had imagined. How? High Chancellor Corinth's voice was strained. How do you know these things? Because we've been watching you for decades, General Webb replied. Every transmission, every tactical briefing, every private conversation between high-ranking officials. Did you really think a species that went from stone tools to space travel in 10,000 years wouldn't figure out how to crack your communication protocols? The chamber erupted in chaos. Representatives were shouting in dozens of languages, translators were overloading, and the air filtration system was working overtime to handle the sudden spike in stress pheromones. Silence. High Chancellor Corinth's voice boomed through the chamber's amplification system. Even if your claims are true, you cannot expect the consortium to simply accept this terrorism. Director Vasquez tilted her head again, and I realized that gesture was becoming my least favorite thing in the universe. Terrorism? She repeated. Chancellor, let me ask you something. If someone breaks into your home, kills your family, and burns down everything you've built, what do you call it when you hunt them down and make them pay? That's different, Corinth protested. The consortium has legitimate authority. The consortium, Vasquez interrupted, has exactly as much authority as we choose to recognize. And right now that's somewhere between 0 and negative infinity. She turned to address the entire assembly, her voice carrying to every corner of the vast chamber. Let me be very clear about something. We didn't start this war. We didn't ask for this conflict. We were perfectly content to stay in our little corner of the galaxy, growing our food and building our cities and generally minding our own business. Her voice grew harder, like diamond cutting through steel. But you couldn't leave us alone. You had to test us, probe us, see how far you could push the primitive little humans before we broke. Well, congratulations. You found out. General Webb stepped forward, his earlier amusement replaced by something much more dangerous. The question now is what happens next. You have 3 options. 1. You can formally apologize for the unprovoked attack on our worlds, provide full reparations to the families of the victims, and pledge never to interfere with human space again. 2. Dr. Singh continued, her cybernetic eye glowing brighter, you can continue this war, in which case we'll demonstrate exactly why picking a fight with a species that conquered their own planet through sheer bloody-mindedness was a tactical error of historic proportions. And 3? High Chancellor Corinth asked, though she sounded like she already knew she wouldn't like the answer. Director Vasquez smiled, and it was the kind of smile that made me suddenly understand why humans had conquered their homeworld despite lacking natural weapons, armor, and their enhanced senses. 3, she said, is that we stop being diplomatic about this. The silence that followed was so complete I could hear the quantum fluctuations in the chamber's energy grid. Every representative in the room was doing the same calculation and coming up with the same terrifying conclusion. If this was the humans being diplomatic, what would they be like when they stopped trying to be nice? You're asking us to capitulate to your demands, Admiral Zephon 12 said, his voice hollow. To acknowledge that a species barely out of their home system can dictate terms to the Galactic Consortium. No, Director Vasquez replied. I'm not asking you to do anything. I'm telling you what's going to happen. The only question is whether you want to maintain the pretense that you have a choice in the matter. She gestured to the holographic display, which now showed a star map of the local sector. Red dots marked human territories, blue dots marked consortium worlds, and yellow dots marked the locations of recent battles. Over the past month, 17 consortium fleets have engaged human forces. The casualty ratio is approximately 15,000 to 1 in our favor, and your naval capacity in this sector has been reduced by 67%. Your supply lines are compromised. Your communication networks are infiltrated. And your military leadership is operating under the assumption that tomorrow might be the day they all die horribly in the vacuum of space. The map zoomed in on a cluster of systems near the galactic core. These are your major shipyards. Notice how they're all highlighted in red. That's not because we're planning to attack them. It's because we've already placed gravitational mines in their orbital paths. On signal from us. And your entire fleet production capacity becomes a scattered field of exotic matter. Trade Minister Clax made a sound like a punctured pressure vessel. You're talking about economic warfare on a scale that would destabilize the entire galactic economy. Exactly, General Webb replied cheerfully. Isn't it wonderful how quickly things can change when you stop treating war like a game? High Chancellor Corinth's serpentine form was coiled so tightly I thought she might snap. What you're describing is justice? Dr. Singh suggested. Proportional response? Long overdue consequences for your actions? It's madness, Corinth whispered. You're talking about the destruction of everything we've built over millennia. Director Vasquez's expression softened slightly, but not in a way that made anyone feel better. Chancellor, let me tell you something about humans. We're very good at building things. We're also very good at breaking things. The difference is, we usually prefer to build. But when someone forces our hand..." She shrugged, a gesture that somehow conveyed the casual indifference of a species that had survived ice ages, plagues, wars, and their own worst impulses. When someone forces our hand, we become very creative about the breaking part. The holographic display shifted again, showing detailed schematics of consortium military vessels. Every weakness, every design flaw, every potential point of failure was highlighted in glowing red. "We've been studying your technology for decades," Dr. Singh explained. "Every ship design, every weapon system, every defensive protocol. We know exactly how to take apart everything you've built, piece by piece, system by system. And we will," General Webb added, his smile returning. "Unless, of course, you'd prefer to discuss option 1. The chamber fell silent again, and I realized that history was being made in this moment. Not the kind of history that gets written in textbooks, but the kind that gets whispered in dark corners by survivors trying to explain how everything went wrong. High Chancellor Corinth looked around the chamber, seeking support from her fellow representatives. What she found were faces filled with the kind of terror that comes from realizing you've been playing chess with someone who's been playing three-dimensional warfare. We need time to consider your proposal," she said finally. "Of course," Director Vasquez replied. "Take all the time you need. Just remember that while you're considering, our defensive platforms are still operational, our intelligence networks are still monitoring your communications, and our patience is still finite." She turned to leave, then paused. "Oh, and Chancellor? The next time you decide to test a species' resolve by bombing their civilian populations, you might want to make sure you can actually win the war that follows." As the three humans walked out of the chamber, their footsteps echoing in the absolute silence, I couldn't shake the feeling that we'd just witnessed the end of an era. The Galactic Consortium had ruled through fear and superior technology for over 1,000 years. But now, for the first time in our history, we were the ones who were afraid. The humans had just taught us a lesson about the difference between being civilized and being weak. And frankly, I wasn't sure we were going to survive the education. The emergency session convened exactly 6 hours after the humans departed, which was roughly 5 hours and 59 minutes longer than most of us needed to realize we were completely screwed. The Great Assembly Hall felt different now, like a morgue where the bodies hadn't been removed yet. High Chancellor Corinth slithered to the central podium, her usually pristine scales dulled with stress secretions. "Fellow representatives," she began, her voice carrying none of its usual authority, "we face an unprecedented situation." "Unprecedented?" Admiral Krex 15 burst from his seat, his exoskeleton crackling with bioelectric fury. "They've declared war on the entire consortium. We should be mobilizing every fleet, every weapon system, every what?" interrupted Senator Thylos, her tentacles writhing with barely contained panic. "Did you not hear what they said? They've already destroyed 47 of our ships without losing a single vessel. They've compromised our communications, infiltrated our intelligence networks, and apparently mined our shipyards while we were debating trade regulations." I watched the exchange with growing fascination. The consortium had ruled the galaxy for over a millennium through a combination of technological superiority and careful political maneuvering. Now, faced with an opponent who played by entirely different rules, our entire system was collapsing like a house of cards in a solar wind. "Perhaps," suggested Trade Minister Clax, his voice quavering, "we should consider their first option. A formal apology, reparations, and a pledge of non-interference seems reasonable." The silence that followed was broken by Admiral Zephon 12's bitter laugh. "Reasonable? You want to prostrate ourselves before a species that didn't even have fusion power when my grandfather was born? The political ramifications alone would..." "I would what?" Dr. Vex 9 interjected, his 4 eyes blinking rapidly. "Embarrass us? Damage our reputation? In case you haven't noticed, Admiral, our reputation is currently floating in space as superheated plasma." The arguing continued for another hour, growing more heated and less productive by the minute. Finally, High Chancellor Corinth called for order, her amplified voice cutting through the chaos like a neutron beam through tissue paper. Enough, she declared. We need to focus on facts, not emotions. Intelligence Director Morpheus 3, what can you tell us about human military capabilities? The Intelligence Director rose slowly, his cybernetic implants flickering with data streams. Chancellor, based on our analysis of the Battle of Kepler 442 billion and subsequent engagements, human military technology appears to be at least 50 years ahead of our most optimistic projections. 50 years? Admiral Krex 15 scoffed. That's impossible. Our surveillance networks have been monitoring their development for decades. They barely achieved faster than light travel 5 rotations ago. That's what we thought, Morpheus 3 replied grimly. However, it appears their technological development has been deliberately concealed. What we interpreted as primitive fumbling was actually sophisticated misdirection. He activated a holographic display showing technical schematics. Their defensive platforms utilize weaponized gravitational fields, something we considered theoretically impossible. Their ships employ stealth technology that renders them invisible to our sensors until they choose to reveal themselves. Most disturbing of all, their intelligence gathering capabilities far exceed our own. How is that possible? Demanded Senator Thylos. Because they've been treating this as a war from the beginning, Morpheus 3 explained. While we saw them as a minor curiosity, they saw us as a potential threat and prepared accordingly. Every piece of technology they've revealed publicly has been decades behind their actual capabilities. The implications hit the chamber like a shockwave. If the humans had been preparing for war while maintaining the facade of primitive newcomers, what else had they been hiding? There's more, Morpheus 3 continued. Our analysis suggests the weapons they've deployed represent only a fraction of their actual arsenal. The director's threat about stopping their diplomatic approach wasn't hyperbole. It was a warning. High Chancellor Corinth's scales had gone completely gray. What are you saying? I'm saying that if we reject their terms, we might not live long enough to regret it. The chamber erupted again, but this time the shouting had a different quality. Fear was replacing anger, and desperation was replacing outrage. These weren't the voices of leaders debating policy. They were the voices of prey animals realizing they'd been stalked by a predator they'd never seen coming. There has to be another way, pleaded Senator Corex 7, her voice barely audible above the chaos. Some diplomatic solution that doesn't require us to capitulate to their demands. Such as? Dr. Vex 9 asked acidly. Perhaps we could offer them a strongly worded resolution expressing our disappointment in their tactical superiority. Before anyone could respond, the chamber's main communication system activated without authorization. The familiar figure of Director Elena Vasquez appeared on the central display, her expression unreadable. Apologies for the interruption, she said, her voice carrying the same casual authority as before. But we thought you might appreciate an update on current events. High Chancellor Corinth's voice came out as a strangled hiss. How are you accessing our secure communications? The same way we've been accessing them for the past 30 years, General Webb replied, stepping into view. Though I have to say your security protocols are adorable. It's like watching children play with toys they don't understand. The display shifted to show a tactical map of the local sector. Red icons were moving through space at impossible speeds, while blue icons representing consortium forces seemed frozen in comparison. As we speak, Dr. Singh announced, our fleets are taking positions around every major consortium world within 50 light-years of human space. Not to attack, you understand, but to demonstrate a point. What point? Admiral Zephon 12 demanded. That your military response time is measured in days, while ours is measured in hours, Director Vasquez replied. If we wanted to end this war decisively, we could have every consortium capital under siege before your emergency protocols even finished loading. The tactical display zoomed in on individual star systems, showing human vessels in perfect formation around heavily defended worlds. The precision was terrifying. Not a single ship was out of position, Not a single formation showed any sign of the chaos that typically accompanied large-scale military maneuvers. "This is impossible," breathed Admiral Krex 15. "Our long-range sensors would have detected fleet movements on this scale." "Your long-range sensors detect exactly what we want them to detect," General Webb replied with that infuriating smile. "The ships you're seeing now have been in position for weeks. We've just stopped bothering to hide them." The implications were staggering. If human forces had been moving freely through consortium space for weeks without detection, every strategic assumption we'd made was worthless. "But you're showing us this to prove a point," High Chancellor Corinth said, her voice hollow. "But what do you want?" "What we've always wanted," Director Vasquez replied. "To be left alone. But since that's apparently too much to ask, we'll settle for ensuring it never happens again." The display shifted again, showing detailed recordings of the attacks on human agricultural worlds. The footage was devastating in its clinical precision. Consortium ships methodically destroying cities, farms, and infrastructure with the kind of thoroughness that suggested this had been planned as genocide, not military action. 12 million civilians, Dr. Singh repeated. Farmers, teachers, engineers, children. All dead because you decided to test our resolve. Those worlds were established in violation of settlement protocols, Admiral Zephon 12 protested weakly. "Protocols established by whom?" General Webb asked. "When did the consortium acquire the authority to dictate where peaceful beings could live?" The question hung in the air like a sword waiting to fall. The truth was, the consortium had simply assumed that authority through superior firepower and the unwillingness of other species to challenge it. But the humans had just proven that assumption was built on sand. "We have a proposal," Director Vasquez announced, "as a modification to our earlier terms." High Chancellor Corinth straightened hopefully. "What kind of modification?" "Instead of a formal apology and reparations, we'll accept a simple acknowledgement of facts. Publicly state that the consortium attacked human civilian populations without provocation, that this action was a war crime under galactic law, and that such actions will never be repeated." "And if we refuse?" Senator Thylos asked. The tactical display shifted one final time, showing the positions of human fleets around consortium worlds. But now additional information was overlaid on the image. Population centers, industrial complexes, government facilities, all highlighted in red. "If you refuse, Dr. Singh said quietly, "we'll demonstrate what an actual military response looks like. Every world that participated in the attack on our colonies will experience what our civilians experienced. Every ship that fired on our farms will be turned into expanding clouds of debris. Every admiral who gave those orders will learn what it feels like to watch their worlds burn." "That's genocide," Admiral Krex 15 whispered. "No," Director Vasquez corrected, "that's justice. Genocide is what you attempted when you decided to wipe out our agricultural colonies. What we're offering is proportional response." The chamber fell silent as the full weight of the situation settled on everyone present. The humans weren't bluffing. They had the capability to carry out their threats, and more importantly, they had the will to do so. "You have 1 hour to decide," General Webb announced. "After that, we stop asking nicely." The communication link terminated, leaving the chamber in stunned silence. 1 hour to decide the fate of the Galactic Consortium. 1 hour to choose between admitting error and facing annihilation. High Chancellor Corinth looked around the chamber, seeking guidance from faces that showed nothing but terror and resignation. All in favor of accepting human terms? The vote was unanimous. 57 minutes later, High Chancellor Corinth stood before the assembled representatives of 300 worlds and formally acknowledged that the consortium had committed unprovoked acts of aggression against human civilian populations. She publicly apologized for these actions, pledged that they would never be repeated, and announced new protocols for interspecies relations that would prevent similar incidents in the future. The humans accepted the statement with the same casual indifference they'd shown throughout the crisis. Their fleets withdrew from consortium space as quickly as they'd arrived. leaving behind only the lingering reminder that the balance of power in the galaxy had shifted permanently. As I watched the proceedings conclude, I couldn't help but reflect on the lessons learned. The humans had taught us that technological superiority meant nothing without the wisdom to use it properly. They'd shown us that underestimating an opponent based on preconceptions was a fatal mistake. Most importantly, they demonstrated that sometimes the most dangerous enemies are the ones who simply want to be left alone. The Galactic Consortium would survive this crisis, but it would never be the same. We'd learned that our authority extended only as far as our ability to enforce it, and that there were species in the galaxy who possessed both the power and the will to challenge that authority. The humans had kept their word. They'd stopped being diplomatic about it. And frankly, I was grateful we'd never have to find out what that actually meant.